Welcome back to Beyond the Bottom Line. I'm your host, Bert Miller. And this is the second season of Beyond the Bottom Line. And the first season was fantastic. We had the head of Bacardi with Pete Carr, Peter Mondavi from Charles Krug, the proprietor there at Charles Krug, and of course, the one and only Chris Voss. Season 2 is proven to be fantastic as well, and today's guest is no different. I have Ellis Singer McCue, who is the CEO of Territory Foods. It's a venture-backed fresh food platform that brings really what I'd like to call bespoke, crafted, healthy food from local chefs and restaurants directly to your door as a consumer. So Territory is a fresh take on the food preparation and distribution industry, providing chef-prepared meals with nutritionist-approved menus to support dietary preferences. And it's really powered by a proprietary, personalized algorithm. So I look forward to digging in with that. Welcome, Ellis.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I look forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So where I'd like to start is this. I want to understand, how you grew up and what dreams you had. So tell me a little bit about yourself and some of the dreams that you had when you grew up.
Let's see. I think it's an odd place to start because I think if you ask me, as a young person, as a child, did I want to be a CEO? Did I think I was going to get into like health and wellness food? The answer would have been no. I've always been sort of just a forever learner. I love to explore and understand things. Grew up in central Massachusetts in the middle of rural areas. I'm educated in Providence for upper school and then Baltimore for college at Johns Hopkins University, which is like a great place for people who love to learn. I have a degree in international studies, East Asian studies, history, and economics. Because I'm just sort of a nerd is what I would say. But I think the amazing thing is that, I was at a university that is known for engineering. And that means that there's this understanding of how the way things work impacts everything, no matter what your discipline was there. So graduated from college right in the middle of the recession, 2008. So it was a really interesting time. I had been doing a ton of internships in like banking and, a lot of different things to do with an international studies and East Asian studies degree, really thinking I wanted to work in the international space or maybe get a master's, global recession and really different time. And so I tried my hand at technology consulting and I worked with Deloitte Consulting. They took a very big risk on me because I had absolutely no technical background. But I always thought if I can speak Mandarin Chinese and I can teach myself Mandarin Chinese, like I can potentially, talk to people about SQL and I can talk to them about systems that I don't really understand. And sort of took that entrepreneurial learning kind of aspect in my everyday to my career really early. One thing on my upbringing, I will say, is that my dad went to school for aerospace engineering and then became a dentist. So I think he really, he brought that kind of, engineering focus of how do things work to my early life. And in the 90s, I was like taking computers apart and putting them back together and all these like really interesting things on the weekends. And my parents ran my dad's dental office as a small business. They never would have called themselves entrepreneurs. Not many people in the 80s and 90s would have, but they ran a great small business that was a part of their community. It was well run. They thought about people's career trajectories. They thought about how do they make more money? How do they expand? And all those core elements of entrepreneurial behavior. And so it was imprinted on me from a really, really young age. And I kind of banked those learnings and took them with me into the early parts of my career.
Yeah, it's fascinating that Deloitte, the Gap, ZX Ventures, and now Territory Foods, growing up in the middle of Mass, we won't talk about the Patriots at all because I have.
We should not.
No, I have an issue. I have an issue with that.
No.
Yeah. Having said that, though, I did read somewhere where you wanted to be a rock star. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah, I really wanted to be a rock star when I was younger. It sounds silly, but I loved it. And I spent a lot of time on stage when I was a young person. I did like musical theater and drama and, summer camp every year and everything like that. And I think it's part of the reason I'm super comfortable getting in front of large groups of people. I just spoke in front of a group of, I think like 3,000 people the other day. And somebody says to me like, "Oh, are you so nervous?" And I was like, "No, why would I ever be nervous in this environment?" So I think like the things that you do as a young person, and I'm talking like young, like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they really do imprint and change how you view the world. But lots of improv comedy, lots of time on stage. I said, I want to be cool. I want to be a rock star. I am not that cool. And nor was I that talented in vocal or any type of music to make a career out of it. But I have a lot of admiration for people who do.
Yeah, I'm digressing. We're way off the beaten path already. So, yeah, I mean, there are a few, nerds that are actually cool. You seem to be one of those. So,
Thank you.
before we actually get into the interview, tell me a little bit about the rock star piece. Who did you? I mean, who was somebody that you admired and impacted you?
From a music perspective, I
Yeah.
think one of my favorites, Carlos Santana.
Oh,
Just an odd choice, but like, listen, Santana, when Santana's on stage, everything is about that moment, and the music is incredible, and it flows through your body, and it's just like every single person feels the same thing. And I think when music is that engrossing, it's incredible. It's like this communal event. And then on the like kind of opposite spectrum of the world, like I love Britney Spears. I will not hide it at all. I think she's an incredible performer. I think that it's an incredible thing to get up in front of hundreds of thousands of people and be able to execute dance, vocals, like looking great, like all these things. It's so hard. And I think that, it's amazing to see so many different styles of people get up on that stage and perform and have like not just musical talent, but like physical talent with it, but bring the audience with you. Like, I think that's the real magic of rock and roll, is that everyone feels that collective heartbeat. So that's what I really love, whether you're performing or like I subject my team to twice a week weekly stand-ups where I really feel that communal heartbeat where we're all together. And I think it's a big part of community and culture.
I love that. Certainly, Carlos can play the axe without, better than anybody.
Amazing.
So, yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So, you prior to Territory Foods, I should say, you worked at ZX Ventures, and
Mm-hmm.
so what interests me about that is you launched products in 9 different business units in 2 years.
Yes. Yes.
That
So
has
I'll
to
tell you,
be, excuse me, I'm
oh,
sorry. That has to be an incredible amount of energy. That the work rate that you had to go through to do that, I got to hear about that.
yeah, absolutely. And so just to level set what ZX Ventures is, so everybody has the context, ZX Ventures is the venture capital and innovation org of AB InBev. AB InBev is the largest CPG company in the world. So it's all the beer brands you can think of. It's Budweiser, Stella, Corona outside of the US, and then a lot of craft beer brands as well. And the craft beer movement is like a very interesting thing in the US and very interesting outside of the US as well. But in the US was really this moment in the late 2000s or the like 2008 timeframe where there was a structural shift in the way people consumed beer. And it was largely driven by a growing population of millennials that were looking for what I would call more specific beverage. And so it was a transition from like people who were drinking light lager in college to saying like, I think it's interesting that I like porter and you like sour, and I want to know the provenance, and I'm interested in hops. And the reason I give you this full context in the craft beer movement is that structural shift in the way consumption worked for beer, not just in the United States, but abroad as well, was the genesis of ZX Ventures. And it was very much AB InBev being so smart in saying, the world is changing around me. How do I get ahead of those changes? And how do I understand the future disruptive categories to my business? So ZX Ventures has a couple different business lines for that. There was a group that was just thinking about home brewing and how the home brewing revolution was going to change beer, craft beer in Latin America, e-commerce. How is e-commerce going to work in the United States where we have a 3-tiered system? How is that going to work? And how does it change the relationship between the customer and the brand itself? And then my division, which was branded extensions. And this was a little bit of a different hypothesis. This was very much, we have over 350 brands internationally, and people love them. And people have this emotionality to them. And if beer as a category is changing, how do we sell them more things? And how do we build a better relationship with the brands through non-beer items? So that was my remit, was anything but beer. And it was just such a fun and interesting time to think of, how do you take the millions of dollars that have gone into these brands, and how do you really utilize those millions of dollars to sell extension products? And so that is 14 different categories. It's like glassware, home accessories, signage, apparel, like everything like that. And 9 geographic zones, as we talked about. So Australia, South Korea, China, UK, and Germany, and then Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, a little bit in the US, but a very different regulatory environment for products that do have beer brands or alcohol brands on them. And a composition of own processes, licensing, a lot of different business models out of it as well. And for me, the excitement was there's just so much there. And the shift into direct to consumer relationships for brands is so powerful because for the first time, a brand can have a one-to-one conversation with the customer about their brand values. And that is, it's so unique. It's so different. I think like as a consumer culture, we get a little bit caught up in the like sales transaction aspect of it, where it's like, how do you actually physically sell the thing? But let's have a conversation about what that means for a consumer's relationship with a brand and how we have to change the way we build brands to keep that relationship and make it bigger and longer. Because what you see happening a lot now is you have legacy brands that are actually getting unseated by new D2C brands that are having a more authentic one-to-one conversation with the customer. So my remit was having that conversation around other products. And so it was just so fun. Like the methodology that we used was basically we would land in a local market, myself and a creative director. We'd grab a local person who spoke the local language, and then we would literally just go to a bar and we would say, what are the brands that we own here and who is drinking them? Like sometimes customer safaris, design thinking methodology, these are all very like technology product ideas, but they really work for the CPG industry and they're super simple. You don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to BCG to do an analysis. Nobody from BCG come after me, but you can do it. You can start to learn about the way consumers interact with your brand and really have that conversation one-to-one. So we would watch the way people would look and interact with the beer brands. We would say, who are the challenger brands that are next to us? And we would build hypotheses around engagement. So for example, we would say, you know, in South Korea, we see a trend where in craft beer bars, throughout the day, the majority of patrons are female. And that is different than other markets. So why? Why is it female? What are they doing? Like, how are they interacting with the brands? And what we uncovered was that there was this really interesting social moment in South Korea where women were loving craft beer because it had floral notes and had fruit notes, and it had this real accessibility from an alcohol perspective. It had varied amounts of alcohol as well, which is really powerful. Like sessionable beer is a powerful thing. And so what we did was we actually built like an education program to say, you know, you can learn more about how beer is made. You can learn more about these different types. And we gave this consumer who was very educated, who was looking for a way to interact with the brands in a bigger way. We gave them an education like plan and merchandise and events and things like that to go with it. And we were able to turn that consumer from a single purchase FMCG consumer who's just drinking a beer and leaving to a brand fan. And when you have that brand connection, they drink with you every time. And it's super powerful. And the amazing thing is you can do it hyper differentiated for all your different brands that you want. And for us at ZX, when I was there, you know, we did 21 different brands, which is, it's a lot of horsepower for sure. And I spent 75% of my time on the road. And it was just so funny because I remember we were going through budgets one year and it was like, you have way too much travel booked. And I was like, yeah, I do have too much travel booked. But it was just integral to building like really authentic experiences and brand moments.
Well, that's incredible. So when you think about the brands today, the experiential and the emotional aspect and relationship that you have with brands, it's pretty interesting. When I think about it, you know, a bit, Ellis, I mean, it's almost, now you have the female population also moving into bourbon. Bourbon's very approachable. So not only is it experiential, and they try to connect with you emotionally and build the brand through very approachable brands and what the brands relate to and how they connect with people. And that's the difference than, say, the legacy that are now trying to catch up with some of the smaller guys that are now connecting with people through various platforms and mediums.
100%. And it's also about like, this is where craft, I think, is so powerful because it forges these really unique one-to-one narratives and it makes it feel personalized. What we're hearing a lot in trends for food and bev right now is personalization. And I think it's something that people are really like, they're afraid of. They're like, what does that mean? Am I going to have 1,000 variants of my product? Am I going to have to figure out how I make all these swaps? But when it comes down to personalization, what it truly means is having that emotional relationship with a product where you feel it's for you. That's all a customer wants. They just want the thing that's for them. And so I think what craft does well, bourbon for sure, beer as well, is very much and additionally in food, is creating this moment that just shows somebody like, this is a safe place for you to learn about this category. This is an experience place that you're proud to be part of this brand. You're proud to be part of this brand world. And we're going to deliver you something that you really love. It feels like it's just for you.
Yeah. So your diverse background, I guess the question I would ask is, how did you end up at Territory Foods?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of going back to the beginning. So I started my career at Deloitte Consulting, which in the technology practice, it's an incredible place to launch a career. There's a reason they're at the top of every list every time. But I always had a hypothesis as a non-technical technologist, right? Because I came from a non-technical background, but was deploying lots of technology, just had a really different view. And the amazing thing to me was that as an early part of my career, I was, thrust to the front of always being the person to translate to the client because I was non-technical. And what that meant for me was that I really built a ton of empathy for the client. And I would say, why, this is my big thing. It's like, why does anybody buy Oracle software? Because that's mainly what I work with: Oracle, SAP, NetSuite, so on and so forth. Why does anybody buy this? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to find efficiencies in their business through standardized processes that have been pre-vetted, right? They're saying like, something in my business is causing me inefficiency and it's causing me waste, and I'm just not sure how to fix it. So who has already fixed it? And then the amazing thing to me is that they would spend millions of dollars customizing it. Right. So it's like you bought this standard thing that's the best practices, and now you're trying to backfit all of your processes into it. And that was amazing to me. And I remember I was sitting with this client in Germany, this amazing semiconductor tester manufacturer, super complex landscape. It was an American company that had been purchased by a German company that had been purchased by a Japanese company. And they were doing like intercompany sales of intermediate parts and like shifting things around the world. Like, if you can ever think of a more complex costing environment, like, you actually can't. It's the most complex costing environment you would ever see with a physical supply chain. And the people were so smart. Like, the client was so smart. This is not, a stereotype of a client that just like doesn't know what they're doing. This client knew. And it was amazing to me because I remember saying to him, but why are you trying to force this? And he said, because it's integral to our business. And that was really the lightning bolt moment for me, that if you have complexity in your finance, supply chain, your operations, it has to provide real tangible value to the consumer. Otherwise, you are wasting money. That, like, point blank. And your whole job as a business is to minimize the amount of waste in your internal operation and maximize the value to your customer to drive the maximum amount of value to your shareholders. And so it's really interesting to say, like, with that lens to every single thing in our business, does the complexity justify? Like, is it justified to the consumer? So after about 6 years with Deloitte, I was very tired of deploying Oracle, is the honest truth of that, and was sort of looking at my path ahead of me and said, where do I want to go? I had always loved fashion, but I'm not a very like tangibly creative person, but had always thought, I have this background in East Asian studies. We could potentially work in sourcing. I could work internationally. And so I went to Gap Inc., which was, Gap Inc. is a behemoth. It's an incredible retailer with an amazing legacy. 1969, Donna Doris Fisher. Like, if you want to talk about a values-based business that is good to the core, Gap Inc. is it. Like, incredible place. And I landed there at this pivotal moment of shift, because this is when e-commerce was really just like starting to rock the Gap Incs. Of the world. So this is like the 2013 timeframe. And you have this emergence of all these direct-to-consumer companies like Everlane, Bonobos, Rothy's, Lafleur, and they're having that direct-to-consumer relationship with the customer that we just talked about. They're building that authentic brand communication. And Everlane specifically was saying, pay more for these items, because when you pay more for these items, we give a basketball court to our factory in Bangladesh. And if you think about it from like a radical transparency perspective, like, it's just such a big change in the way that everything is narrated to the customer and value and everything like that. And what was amazing about Gap at that time is that there was this massive e-commerce shift happening. And at the same time, they had made a massive structural shift on the operation to have all products internationally go through two essential ports, distribution centers, one in the UK and one in Hong Kong. And the franchise business, the 44 international markets that are not wholly owned by Gap Inc., was a big growing business. It was managed outside of the US by an incredible team in London that was doing business development, and the supply chain was managed through San Francisco. And I came in at the moment where it's like the confluence of e-commerce and these big structural shifts, and the whole business just changed, right? And coming just, directly from consulting, it was actually the perfect first post-consulting role, because it was a total mess. And it was very much like, it was a financial mess, it was a supply chain mess, it was an operations mess, it was a business development mess, like all these things. And I'm just like someone who loves a mess. And so I remember my first day, like, I came in and I like left and I was like, whew, this is going to be a lot. This is going to be so much. And I remember just taking like a very, very practiced approach, like figuring out the financial side of the house. Like, how do we budget? How do we forecast? Where is the flaw in the retail math? How do we build a better relationship? How do we increase sell-through? And then layering on the e-commerce side of the house, really saying like, how do we know the Saudi Arabian Gap customer? Like, are we just taking the US customer and bringing those products to Saudi Arabia? Or is there more to learn? And the thing that really struck me was that these franchisees, they really knew their customers. Like, they really know, like the people who run the Dubai Mall, like they know their shit, pardon my language. Like, they're very, very smart. Like, they know. And so I basically said, we can learn from them. Like, let's learn from the people who are close to that customer, and let's think of how we can make the whole global supply chain work for this customer so we can be faster and more nimble, and we can cut purchase orders in 6 weeks, not 6 months, and we can get a product that is more like direct to consumer responsive from a personalization and from a design sense perspective. I did it all on spreadsheets, 2:00 in the morning, myself in a planner, like craziness, cutting thousands of purchase orders for pants and things like that. Just that very like entrepreneurial spirit is what I would say. And had the best of times. Like, honestly, like an incredible team there. Long hours like feed my soul. And I'm not somebody who's like, oh my God, I needed to leave at 5 and I couldn't leave at 5. And I've always been lucky enough to have leadership that really appreciates that, and a team around me that are motivated by that spirit of, hey, we can figure this out. And we may be inside of a $16 billion business, but this is our business. And let's figure it out for the franchisees, for ourselves, whatever it is. So it was incredible. And I moved from San Francisco to London to do a little bit of business development. I helped launch Gap India, which was an incredible experience with an amazing partner, and Old Navy UAE, which is just like an incredible experience with like a value-based, such an American product in that environment, and who are we serving? And then I moved back to New York. So I'd gone, I negotiated a cross-coast move in there and landed in New York and kind of said, okay, what's next? Like, I have now, made the supply chain faster. For me, it was always like, is it better? There's a lot of waste in the retail supply chain. There's a lot of wastewater that's produced in the velocity of, white pants that people purchase. And so I kind of said, I'm not sure if I want to do this for long run. I want to get further into the world of direct to consumer. I want to get further into personalization. I want to get further into this new world of e-commerce that's emerging. And so I put my resume out and I was recruited by ZX Ventures. And so, the ZX Ventures story is that it's an incredible place to launch a business. And I grew the business really dramatically in 2 years. And for me, I've always been someone that looked at like personal goals and targets. And one of the things that's great about AB InBev and ZX Ventures is it is a meritocracy. People focus very much on the numbers, like, have you produced today? Like, how does it work? And so I sort of held myself really accountable to that same type of internal KPI as well. And I was cresting my second year with ZX Ventures, and the business was doing really, really well. And I said, okay, now what? Like, is it my dream to make $100 million for AB InBev, or is it my dream to find another way to do it? And I had been on the road 75% of the time, as I mentioned, and my health had totally fallen apart. I was ill all the time. And for me, I've always been very, very connected to the world of health and wellness. I lost my father to a stage 4 glioblastoma, which is brain cancer, when I was 21 years old. And that kind of, life moment for a 21-year-old, it's obviously like grief, but beyond that is the moment of mortality. And it's very much, how do I live a good life, and will I have the same fate? And so I was experimenting with my own personal health and wellness for cancer prevention and for just general health. I would say, probably from the 2010 timeframe on. And I, was looking, in 2018, when I was leading ZX Ventures, I said, how do I apply the skills that I've got in rapidly scaling organizations, big and small? How do I take this new direct to consumer and e-commerce muscle that I've built and have a ton of success with? And how do I bring it to a company that has the values that I have? Because that's the other thing, is just, you can go work anywhere. I always say this to our team, anybody can go work anywhere, but why? Like, why do you work every day? And how do you bring your values to work? And how do you do work that is meaningful to you? Because you're going to work no matter what. And I found territory. And they were hiring a finance person, and they had been through a tremendous amount of growth, and were really coming to kind of a change moment in the way that the business was built and the way the business needed to be funded and everything like that. And I met the leadership team and basically said, this sounds great to me, and sign me up. And that's how I ended up here.
Well, that's fantastic. So let me just understand this. You learned to do pivot tables when you were at the Gap on Excel, and then you were dealing with franchisees. working for corporate and getting into the growth era of e-com. Sounds like a great time, and that's awesome. So you ended up at Territory Foods. That's fantastic. So at Territory, when I think about that, and I want to come back to an award that where you were voted one of the best CEOs. Before I go there, I really want to ask you a little bit about once you arrived at Territory and you saw what was there, as you evaluated where you currently are at Territory Foods. What is the North Star there? I mean, what is the one thing that when you get out of bed every day and your team gets out of bed every day, what do they understand is the North Star that we're striving for every single day?
Yeah, our mission is to make the world better through healthy food. Like super simply, right? We always think about every single thing we do is to make people's lives better through food. And that can mean so many different things to different people. It can be a working mom who's trying to put food on the table for her entire family after a 12-hour day, which is me. That's me. It can be somebody who is suffering from a health challenge and they're saying, wow, my doctor just told me I have high blood pressure and I don't know what to do now. It can be somebody who is just experiencing those first growing pains of, crossing the threshold from 29 to 30 and everything just works a little bit different, or 30 to 40 or 40 to 50. And everyone's life is impacted by food, and your health is so integral to the everything of your life, right? I think that's the one thing that has come out of the global pandemic that I do appreciate, is that people think about their health so much more actively. And they say, it's not just about weight loss. It's not just about metabolic health. It's about immunity. It's about your life. And it's about this body as a system, and how if you put great inputs into your system, you're going to have great outputs. You're going to feel better. Your brain is going to be more clear. You're going to be a better, parent, a better friend, a better dog owner, whatever you are. Right. And I think that's our mission, right? Because what we do at the macro level is we keep people happy and healthy every single day. We perform a service that is so important to our customers, and we're constantly showing people how they can change their lives through better food. And that's an amazing mission. It's not an easy mission, and it's a multi-headed mission. But when it comes down to it, we think about the way that we make not just our customers' lives better, but the lives of all of the partners we work with as well. So Territory is a distributed chef network. You alluded to this earlier, but unlike everyone else in the direct-to-consumer food category who are vertically integrated manufacturers, very much like a CPG company, Territory is a distributed chef network. We work through a remote network of 55 different chefs, restaurants, and caterers. We are built that way because we believe the expertise in food production lives in these small producers who make the food with a lot of love. And they believe in what they're doing. They run great businesses. We're not an open platform where anyone can just kind of sign up and like throw a shingle on our platform. These are highly vetted, true partners to Territory. And then what we do is we actually commercialize the meals on behalf of these partners. We work with them. Our R&D team and our culinary managers go out and they take the 90,000 points of consumer data that we capture every single week on dietary preferences, protein trends, flavor preferences, everything like that. We send it to the chefs and we say, okay, in Los Angeles, we see a need for chicken center of the plate, ketogenic diet style food. And we take it out to them and we say, okay, we think it's going to be this much to the consumer. Who's really great at Southeast Asian food? Who's really great at chicken because it's hard to make? Who's great at keto because it's a weird dietary style? And then the chef does all the R&D in their kitchen. They use their own staff. They use the capital investments they've already made, which is great because it allows them to double and triple utilize those assets. And then they give it to our culinary managers. Our culinary managers do a taste and nutrition check, and then we commercialize. And if you think about that process, without our chef partners, there is no Territory, because that is the way we operate. And so when we think about making people healthier, it's not just the end consumer, it's also the businesses that we touch. And that's where I feel like my background in franchising has paid off dividends, because I think about all of our partners very much, not just about how does it work for us, but how do we build them a strong financial world as well? And how do we help them be better businesses? Because if you're a restaurant, you're used to operating on, sure, 10% is what you're targeting from a gross profit or margin perspective at the end of the day. But we all know that restaurants are living on like the very edge, a lot of them. And the global pandemic really shook them up. And a lot of people are looking now, not just at their restaurant as a restaurant, but as multiple business lines. And Seamless, Uber Eats, DoorDash, all of those, they're not meant to be a business line for these restaurants. They're meant to be loss leader marketing. And unfortunately, now that's a significant portion of a restaurant's business. Let's call it 30%, 40%. And so now you have these operators that were already working in a margin constrained environment. There's a lot of rockiness in foot traffic. There's a lot of rockiness in whether people are going to come in. Piling on seamless Uber Eats, DoorDash, which are margin, erosive models, you have a lot of risk. And your local food economy is critical. It's so critical for the health of your local economy. And so for us, one of our missions at Territory is to come into these environments and use the fact that we've developed a business model that delivers back gross profit to the restaurant. We talk to them about their pricing. We talk to them about their costing. And then we just help them. Like, we have expertise, we have a lot of expertise in food safety, quality, operations, culinary development, everything like that. And we deploy that expertise with our partners. And certainly, that expertise, we flexed it. Sometimes they're asking us like financial questions and HR questions. We try to stay out of that kind of stuff for sure. But it's an amazing opportunity to think of the ecosystem and say, how do we change not just the lives of end customers, but how do we change the entire direct-to-consumer food ecosystem to make it more equitable, to make it more balanced, and to really touch the locality aspect as well? Because direct-to-consumer, it can really starve a local community for sure.
Yeah. So when I think about, when I'm thinking about the audience a bit, Ellis, I mean, a bespoke, crafted menu that's delivered to your door, that's healthy, where you're working with them, obviously, to increase their profit percentage, helping the local market, and putting wellness and great food on people's tables every night. I love the mission, really do love the mission.
Thank you.
Before we get out of here, I know that you were voted one of the best CEOs from Comparatively, and you were named, I guess the company was named one of the best places to work for women.
Mm-hmm.
What qualities do you believe make a great leader?
I think number one is empathy. And I think that empathy is it's kind of like a new leadership word. I would say that 20 years ago, people were not talking about empathy. But what that means is really opening your eyes as a leader and looking at the audience that you are talking to and thinking of, how do you translate the strategy that you believe in, your personal beliefs about the company, to that audience in a way that they can understand? And how do you hear from them their concerns, and how do you hear from them their interests and their beliefs as well? Territory is a 100% remote company. That means that even before the pandemic, we were very much, separated. And that means that we have to proactively engage. We have to proactively think about how we build that community of trust. So empathy it's just critical. It's hard, but critical.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So empathy, when, it is a word and it is a buzzword right now, Ellis, and so how do you balance that? So there has to be we have to be able to provide empathy as leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and in return, expect some accountability. And
Mm-hmm.
I think with some mutual and obviously communicating, some mutual communication around empathy with accountability, you're able to build a heck of a team. Did you, when you came to Territory and as you guys are building this out, did you make any what I would call transformational or drastic changes to create what I would call a more healthy or nurturing work environment?
So I think the first thing that I did when I came into the business was I took a look at the way that the staff was managed. I know that sounds strange, but in a venture-backed startup, a lot of times, especially founder-led ones, it's just kind of iteratively built. And that means that people don't have career paths. They don't have a good sense of what their job is. I always think about, if this person leaves, how quickly can we backfill them? And basically, is there a real job there, or have they just been doing 1,000 different things? Because 1,000 different things is not a career, right? And I think that in startups, this is a very common thing that happens. And so I came in and I actually put a lot more structure in place around career lattice, around organizational KPIs. We set OKRs every year. We have open transparency around the way we perform against those key results, which goes back to your accountability with empathy. And I think putting a little bit more structure in than had been there is so powerful. And then the other thing is look across your organization and look for your high potential leaders. And even if they're junior in the organization, you as a leader need to think about how you're going to grow and develop them, because your A+ players, they're going to be your biggest risk and your greatest power, because they're going to ask the most from you. I've been an A+ player my whole life, and I have annoyed every boss that I've ever worked for sure, because I'm always asking for more, and I'm always saying what's next. And I'm always asking to push. And nurturing those A+ players is the hardest thing that you're going to do as a leader. So if you identify them early and you have an open communication with them about career and about what it looks like, you can have so much success come through your organization. It's a much more efficient way to grow a leadership team versus, hiring from the outside, so on and so forth. So I came in, I looked at our leadership team, I found some true gems that were buried in the organization and were a little disengaged. With a little bit of tweak, they became superstars, and then put in those people processes around goal setting, around performance management, around career ladders, and have had an open and honest communication with the team since day one. And I think that has been foundational for the trust that is the undercurrent of our business. And that trust is just, it's the way we get everything done.
That's fantastic. And I'm getting ready to ask you our last question. We'll get out of here. But what you just said really resonates. I mean, when I came into MRI Network as an example, we had an individual that she was kind of put, over in the side room at one point, and I had known her for some time, and we've been able to put her, and she is now leading and building an incredible learning and development, not only through our corporate team, but also throughout the franchise network that we're all part of. And all she needed was somebody to unlock the door and just let her run. And I think that's amazing. Your unusual career path, it's just so very, very interesting in the way you've balanced. And you are a great example of people who have the attributes and characteristics where you can, if not necessarily plug and play, you can put just really talented people in good positions, and they will become leaders in those roles. When you talk to people like yourself, where should people, when they're looking at navigating and maybe redirecting their career path, and they're trying to choose where they're going to go next, what should they look for in their next steps?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of simple things for me is you're either going to get the role, the money, or the company, but you're probably not going to get all three. I think a lot of people, when they're making career changes, they want a high title, they want more money, and they want to go to a top tier company. And I've rarely seen that happen, quite frankly, because if you're making a dramatic change in your career, you're probably going to need a little bit of shift. And so I think the biggest thing is to find a role in a leadership team that you see the potential for growth rather than kind of entering at that level to grow. I think that's super important. And then, I mean, the old adage, which is you should always be running towards something and not away from something. So even if that's, when I came to Territory, I really wanted to work at a venture-backed startup with an incredible board, and I wanted a highly complex category. Food is the hardest category, and it's the hardest to reach through a model like ours, right? It's not an easy business, but I wanted to understand and I wanted to apply my operation skills in this environment that was, pressure to grow, venture-backed, everything like that. And for me, that was the value that I was seeking. And I sort of was, I was okay with everything else as long as I got that value. So I think you just really need to know what of those things is the most important to you. Is it the title? Is it the money? Or is it the company? And if you know that, and if you can get two, you're pretty lucky. So that's awesome. But know that. And then not to be afraid, you can always go back. Like I say this to people all the time, especially people leaving consulting. You can literally always go back. You have to push yourself to move forward, and you have to stay positive, and you have to keep your eyes up and say, I am super exhausted now, or I'm super, I'm ready to leave this part of my career. But open your eyes, put your head up, and look around you and find something that sparks passion, and go do that instead. Because staying in the situation you're in, you know what that is, right? You always are going to know what that is, but you don't know what's behind the next door.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I love the role money in your company. That I'm gonna grab that. We'll talk about that later. But anyhow, thank you so much for being on the show. I guess the thing I would leave with is what I heard you really say is find a group that has a platform that you can plug into that best accentuates what your desires really are, and that will kind of take you where you want to be. And Ellis Singer McCue, the CEO of Territory Foods, I appreciate you very much being on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Beyond the Bottom Line. I'm your host, Bert Miller, and we'll see you next time.